This is the Maida Initiative, conversation without compromise.
So my politics really becomes about getting politics out of the way as much as possible so that people's potential to thrive can be unleashed.
And how do you feel about Trump's new religious advisor?
Oh gosh.
We've had some interesting reports about her over in the UK.
Is that Paula White?
I think that's the last. Is there a place for religion and politics to go hand in hand to that extremity, do you think? I mean, you gave the example earlier about Saudi being almost two separate entities that have an understanding, and from that they have this symbiotic relationship where they'll just work together and they keep the two entities separate. Whereas in America, I couldn't ever imagine there being an atheist president. The two seem to be so interconnected there. But do you feel that being a politician almost retracts away from your religious ideologies or your ability to really conform to those?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the way I'd answer this is, if you look at the Bible, there are very distinct offices of government in the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? So in the Old Testament, the way God sets up a society is there's yourself, which is the main form of government, that you are responsible for you. That's the first thing, right? And then you have family government, that fathers are responsible for the well-being of their wives and their children and the people that live with them. And then you have the priests, right? And what the priests do, the priestly system in the Old Testament, this isn't the New Testament, they represent the temple. They represent these animal sacrifices, which are there for when people breach good morals and God's law, then they acknowledge that, they go to the priest and receive this kind of cleansing ritual, right? They're there to be kind of moral advisors. And then you have the king, who is responsible for civil law, like punishing murder, punishing rape, protecting the country from invasion, punishing theft, these sorts of things. You're the king in the courts. And it's actually really important that those things have separate roles. So often what happens in the Islamic world is that you have all those things rolled into one. Religion, government, family, society all end up being this one giant web that you can't really separate from each other. So it's very difficult for the sides to speak to each other. Right now, so on the other hand, I don't think it's possible to separate church and state completely in the way people in secular England would talk about it, because ultimately, you could say, well, do you believe in the separation of morality and state? And we're like, no, of course not. But the thing, I'm not saying non-religious people are immoral, but even non-religious people have a worldview, right, which decides this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And they want the laws to reflect their internal sense of morality, right? So the mistake people make is they think, well, I'm secular, I don't have a religion, therefore I'm neutral, I just have common sense. When everybody has a worldview and everybody wants to see their worldview put in politics. Now, as a Christian, I want the church and the state to have very distinctive jobs, but I want the state to do what is right. I want it to be honest. I want it to protect people. I want it to defend against foreign enemies, right? I want the state to do all those things. And then the church's job is to proclaim compassion and mercy, to help people, to speak truth to people, to challenge bad ideas, right? So you have exactly, right? So you have these different roles. So I have no problem, in theory, with a leader of a country having a religious advisor, because every advisor they have has a worldview. Now, that said, with someone like Paula White, who believes in prosperity theology, which is kind of like this Christian version of a pyramid scheme, you're poor because you don't have enough faith. If you send in money into my show, then God will magically make money appear from somewhere if you give me your credit card details, right?
These televangelists.
Yeah, that's awful. There's plenty of Christians who speak up against that as well. There's actually there's a great rap song, a sort of rap song about by a guy called Trip Lee, called I think it's called "False Teachers." So I'll send it to you
I'm
after
just going to write that down.
So I think, but also what you have is this very apocalyptic end times view with a lot of these people as well, that it's kind of meddling in the Middle East is a kind of means to an end. They think support Israel unquestionably. The Middle East is destined to be in this great conflict with Israel. So let's just stoke the fires, make Israel as strong as possible. The war will happen. Jesus will come back, right? That is a poisonous worldview for foreign policy. And it's not the way the Bible would have us approach foreign policy. The Bible talks about, from the beginning, God calls Abraham and he says, I'm going to make you a great nation so that in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So the idea is that the Bible believes in nations, but it's not this insular, Britain first, America first, screw everybody else kind of nationhood. It's your own nation, which is going to be great for the sake of others, right? And the great nation is defined by having just laws, being a land flowing with milk and honey, so economic prosperity, and care for the rest of the world. Those are the markers of a great nation biblically. Then in the Old Testament, you have one nation of Israel, and then you have a prediction about the kingdom of the Messiah. And what the prediction of the Messiah is that the Messiah is going to have a kingdom where it's going to break apart and destroy all the kingdoms of earth, and it's going to bless all the nations of earth. So the vision of the kingdom of Israel in the Bible is not this great empire which takes all political authority, right? It's a heavenly kingdom that spans across all nations, destroying all the dominions of men, but blessing all the nations. So from a biblical perspective, people having self-determination, self-governance, their own space is a good thing. It helps distill power around the world. And the kingdom of God is always growing from heart and heart to mind and mind. It's like, if you know the classic British song, I vow to thee, my country. And the second verse, right, there is another country I've heard of long ago. And then it says, and soul by soul and shiningly and silently its shining bounds increase. So the idea is that Jesus' kingdom is slowly spreading over the world, destroying the kingdoms of men, but blessing all the nations, helping people flourish everywhere. And that is the kind of foreign policy that Christians should be working towards. Loving our neighbors, loving other nations, fighting for people's self-determinations for their own future so that everywhere on earth can thrive. And no matter what happens, that is the future we should be working towards. Because we don't know when Jesus is going to come back. And we shouldn't try and control that. We should do what we've been told to do, which is love the world, bless all the nations of the earth, and pray for peace and well-being of people.
I think if everybody had that worldview, the earth would be a much nicer place to live in. But it is interesting to see that there certainly are clearly defined roles set between each, as you were saying. I think from the way that you've explained it, I think, you know, government and religion certainly can go hand in hand. I just don't think that they are.
No, they're not. But the thing is, if you don't have those clearly defined categories, it will always seep back into other things. So if you think about British and American politics right now, you have politics, and I would say the left wing especially, although there's problems on the right as well. The left wing especially wants to focus morality, this kind of woke culture, and government into one single entity. And what is that but the combining of church and state? They don't call it a church, but it's a religious worldview that's become, they're trying to make this totalitarian system that fixes everybody's problems. And so if you look at the history of England and America, if you look at the idea of separation of church and state, it's not a secular concept. It's a Protestant Christian concept. So have you ever read a letter concerning toleration by John Locke?
No.
So John Locke is basically considered the father of freedom of speech in the Western world. And if you look at the argument he makes, the argument he makes of why the state should not punish dissenting religious views is not about practical prosperity. It's about the life of Jesus. He's saying, if you look at Jesus' life, Jesus never uses force to try and get someone to agree with him or to suppress those who disagree with him. He actually peacefully, persuasively goes to his death for the sake of truth and then comes back from the dead. So you can't enforce the truth by the sword. You can't, but you also can't kill truth. So in Europe previous to John Locke, you've got the idea that the government is there to help truth prevail. And the argument John Locke is essentially making is the government's job is to create this free and fair arena where truth and error can do battle publicly. And in that setting, the truth will always win eventually. So let's enforce that free and fair arena and let truth win. And that's the basis of freedom of expression in Western society. It comes from biblical roots where you separate these things, you put them in their proper categories, and you trust God for the result, not the government.